Far Cry, the original Far Cry. This game was developed by Crytek and they were based out of Coburg, Germany. This game was originally a tech demo that was used to demonstrate the power of the NVIDIA GeForce 3 series of graphics cards. The developer saw the potential of the tech demo and decided to instead make it into a fully fledged game. However, the original tech demo was not similar to the actual final game. The game is built using the CryEngine 1. The CryEngine would later be split into use by two different companies. Crytek under EA would use the later version, CryEngine 2, to create the game Crysis. Eventually, the CryEngine 3 would be developed and used to create games such as Crysis 2 and Sniper Ghost Warrior 2. Ubisoft would also acquire the CryEngine since they published the original Far Cry. That version of the CryEngine would be developed into the Dunia engine, which would be used to create Far Cry 2. Later on, the Dunia engine would become the Dunia 2 engine and be used in development of Far Cry 3. The original Far Cry was released on the 23rd of March 2004 in North America and would 3 days later be released in Europe on the 26th of March. Physical copy of the game launched with a whopping 5 CDs. The game got an M rating for blood and intense violence. The version used in this review is the Good Old Games version, which is build 14.05 and patch 1.4. Far Cry was considered a commercial success. It sold a total of 730,000 copies in the first 4 months, and then later on it would sell a total of 2.5 million copies. In comparison to some of the best-selling games of that year, such as Star Wars Battlefront, which sold in total in excess of 4 million copies, you could definitely say that Far Cry should be considered as a commercial success. However, the original Far Cry seems to be one of those games that is not necessarily overrated, but perhaps overlooked. Rarely do I ever hear anyone talk about this game, and there doesn't seem to be a big online community surrounding the game either, which I think is odd considering the fact that the game had a big commercial appeal and its tech was really pushing the boundaries of gaming. It's also a part of the Far Cry franchise, which is by now a household name in the gaming world, although to be fair, the game that really put Far Cry on the map was Far Cry 3. At the time, another game that could be considered as a tech rival was Valve's Half-Life 2. These games share a lot of similarities in terms of their tech pushing the boundaries for especially graphics and physics, but also things like map size. Both games do a good job of that, although in the end I would probably say that Half-Life 2 does it better. Also, Half-Life 2 is still way more talked about than the original Far Cry. The game is set in a South Pacific archipelago, possibly in Micronesia. The story follows Jack Carver, who has retired from the US Army Special Forces. He now runs a boat charting business, and he is hired by Valerie Constantine to take her to an island. Valerie claims to be a journalist. Valerie uses a jet ski to get to the island. While she's gone, Jack's boat gets blown up by a rocket and he is thrown into the water and swims to the island. After waking up on the island, Jack overhears a conversation between two mercenaries, saying that they're looking for him.
Listen, dirtbag! Keep an eye out for some punk in a red Hawaiian shirt. If you see him, call me at once. Am I understood?
Yes, sir!
I'm heading out!
On the island, Jack finds a radio. This radio is used by Harlan Doyle, who claims to be a scientist. Jack sets off to find Valerie using Doyle's help. Jack battles through groups of mercenaries stationed on the islands.
Hello? Are you there? Pick up the radio if you can hear this. I know you're there. I've been tracking you since you and Val arrived.
Who are you?
I'm the guy who's going to tell you how to survive. Call me Doyle.
How do I know I can trust you?
Well, for starters, how about the fact that I haven't turned you in? That radio has a bioreader. Since I know you're there, I could have ratted you out already.
Good point. Keep talking.
Listen, you need to get out of there and quickly. I'll help you as much as possible, but you don't have much time. There's an exit that will lead to a small camp. Be careful as you go. This area is crawling with mercenaries.
By the way, name's Jack Carver.
After making it into a cave, Jack encounters his first Trigen. Doyle provides some information about the Trigens, saying that the Trigens are a result of an experimental genetic modification that is being researched and tested. The company doing the research and the testing is the Krieger Corporation with its CEO, Dr. Krieger. Doyle thinks that the experiments have only been conducted on other primates, but he also alludes to the fact that experiments might have been carried out on humans as well.
This archipelago is the ideal location for my research. These islands are isolated from international shipping lanes, so I am free to do my work without interference from the outside world. This work will take time, but a measure of the future of mankind depends on the success of my research here. I will not fail my destiny. The beta strain of mutagen is more potent than I originally anticipated. The test subjects are demonstrating superhuman qualities, but are somewhat unstable. I am concerned they may become difficult to control. I have taken the precaution of using my own DNA as a carrier for the strain. Perhaps this will give them some primordial instinct linking them to me. Then, I should be able to control them. The next test subjects will be ready for incubation soon.
Jack eventually catches up to Valerie. She's being escorted in a helicopter. A struggle ensues on the helicopter. Jack and Valerie is forced to jump out of the helicopter into the water as the helicopter explodes. After washing ashore on the beach, Valerie reveals to Jack that she is an undercover CIA agent investigating the Krieger Corporation's experiments. It is also revealed that Doyle is an undercover CIA agent.
Valerie Constantine, CIA. I'm here on assignment.
You could have mentioned that back in port. How did I get so lucky?
None of the other beach bombs had special forces training.
You had me checked out?
Company policy.
Then you know I'm a bit out of practice.
It's just like riding a bike.
I'm listening.
CIA has an undercover operative on this island. We lost contact almost 10 weeks ago.
Jack, are you there?
Doyle?
Mission accomplished.
Doyle, it's Val. Where are you?
We'll catch up later. You've got to keep moving. Go inland a few hundred yards and you'll find cages holding untrained Trojans.
Copy that.
Untrained Trigens? You mean some of them are trained?
Come on. Jack, help me and I can help you. And the first thing you can do to help is take out that regulator.
Right, I'll do it, but I want to know what's going on here.
We'll meet at Krieger's main archives after you destroy the regulator.
Jack then destroys a regulator, which allows the Trigens to fully escape their captivity.
Great work, Jack. Main power is down. I'm moving into the archive. When I come out, I'll be using one of the ventilation shafts. It should be easy for me to find you on my way out. Stay in the shaft, keep your head down, and wait for me there.
Finally, a suggestion I can agree with. I'm real good at staying put and waiting.
It is also revealed that there are in fact human-made Trigens. When the Trigens are freed, they end up launching a massive revolt against the mercenaries. The human-made Trigens become the organizers and leaders of the Trigens. The story then progresses with various tasks being performed, but it culminates when Jack kills Richard Crow, the mercenary leader. Through information gained by Crow, it is revealed that Dr. Krieger has a tactical nuke on the island. The nuke was intended as a last resort to cover the tracks of his unethical experiments in case of an investigation.
Cole! Come in, Cole! What the devil's going on there? Report! Report!
So you're the famous Dr. Krieger.
Who is this? Who am I talking to?
You'll find out soon enough.
Jack! Bingo. This is the location of the facility where they manufacture the mutagen. It even looks like he has an arming sequence for a tactical nuke in case they had to cover their tracks. Thanks, Crow. You just made this real easy.
Oh yeah, I'm sure this is going to be a lead pipe cinch.
Jack and Valerie plans to steal the nuke to blow up Dr. Krieger's research facility.
Jack, Val, I've received a go from the office. They've assessed the situation, and they need you to take out the main compound.
I think there are two sites we need to worry about. An outpost and the main compound itself. If we want to make sure we take both out, we're gonna need to get the nuke.
The nuke? Are you crazy?
Oh, relax. It's got a very small yield. Just enough to destroy the facility without too much collateral damage. Besides, we'll be out of range and upwind by the time it goes off.
Doyle warns Jack and Valerie that the explosion might expose them to the Trigen mutagen. Doyle then says that they should use a mutagen resistance serum located inside the factory. They do so, and then they arm the nuke.
Your way inside the compound is about as clear as it's going to get. Oh, and one more thing. When that nuke detonates, it could cause all sorts of strange things to happen. What I'm trying to say is that you might be in danger of being affected by the mutagen. You might want to take some precautions.
Precautions? Like not blowing up a nuclear weapon while I'm standing right next to it?
I'm dead serious. You should be able to find a serum used as an inoculation in the compound. They usually keep a good supply there.
Let's prep the nuke, and then we can go grab the serum.
What is this? A bad spy movie? You two are gonna get us all killed!
Doyle, we're inside the lab.
Okay. Antidote time. Look for a red case with a biohazard symbol.
What?
I don't like shots.
I'm sure you'll make a lovely mutant.
Inject the serum into your neck.
The nuke explodes and the blast makes Jack and Valerie go unconscious. They are captured by Dr. Krieger and put on a helicopter. Jack is eventually kicked out of the helicopter and lands in a Trigen-infested area.
Jack, take a look into the future. Nature has failed mankind. Mere humans like you are about to be obsolete. I've only taken a few thousand years of evolution and put it into a test tube. Survival of the fittest. Good luck.
Thanks.
Jack makes his way through the Trigen-infested area and notices that his arm is turning green. Doyle claims that the mutagen concentration in the air might have been too strong for the antidote. Dr. Krieger has a laboratory nearby that was used to develop a cure for the Trigen mutagen. Dr. Krieger has also injected himself with the mutagen and is slowly turning into a Trigen.
Doyle, my armor's turning green.
Sounds like you caught the bug.
I thought I took the antidote.
The antidote should have been able to handle it, but a containment leak could have saturated the air with mutagen. That's what happened to Krieger.
Krieger's infected?
He developed an agent to keep it from spreading. He's still on the treatment. I'm sure he's got it with him.
I'll see if I can talk him into a sample.
Ask nicely. I wouldn't say he's completely human.
Jack makes his way to the laboratory, and inside he finds Valerie and Dr. Krieger.
You all right?
Do I look all right?
I wouldn't worry about it, my dear. You won't live long enough to see what happens next.
Jack kills Dr. Krieger. Jack asks a dying Dr. Krieger if he has the cure for the mutagen, and Dr. Krieger responds with a no. Immediately afterwards, it is revealed that Doyle lied to Jack and Valerie about the antidote. The antidote was actually the mutagen itself. Doyle plans to sell the mutagen on the black market to make a fortune, and Doyle also has the cure. Before going after Doyle, Jack carries Valerie to a nearby boat and leaves her there.
Where's the antidote?
Who infected you?
We entered a toxic area.
The mutagen can only be administered through subdermal injection. I wish I could take credit, but I had no time to prepare the serum. Oh, you should turn out to be a beautiful specimen. Give it another hour. Much less for her.
The old man was always one for melodrama. Too bad he had no head for business.
Doyle, you wouldn't.
Of course I would. Working for the government taught me that where there's a weapon, there's money to be made.
Why didn't you just kill Krieger yourself?
The Trigens are fiercely loyal, and you just killed their father. I'd love to see how they take the news, but I've got a super mutagen to sell.
Doyle, unless you give us the antidote, you're not leaving this island alive. Now, I know you won't believe me until I've got a gun pointed at your head, but it's true.
Sorry, Jack, I'm gonna need it. Forgive me if I don't shake your hand.
I'm coming for you, buddy.
Doyle tries to flee, but Jack catches up to him and kills him. Jack gets the cure off of Doyle's body. The volcano in the area erupts, and Jack barely escapes.
No, please. You don't understand. They sent me. They're always watching. You can't change this. You can't change the future.
Probably not, but I can make sure you're not a part of it. Stupid bastard.
Jack makes his way back to the boat and injects himself and Valerie with the cure. They sail off the island. In the final shot, the camera pans over to the side, showing a folder containing the Project Far Cry files. That is a collection of evidence which is now being released into the world. I think that overall the story has a cool concept, but I think it's executed in a poor manner. The story is very rudimentary. It does the bare minimum that it needs to do in order to string along the missions. The characters are not fleshed out. You only know 1 or 2 details about their background. During the game, not much is revealed about the characters either. And when the game ends, it just ends abruptly with no explanation to anything that happens afterwards. The characters are also just various stereotypes. Jack is the 1980s alpha male action hero, spouting off one-liners and sarcastic remarks. He somehow manages to surpass insurmountable odds and always gets out of every bad situation unharmed. Valerie is often reduced to the sexy babe character, such as this seductive walk. That's usually how I walk as well. Or this scene where she decides to take a bath.
Just keep your eyes on the jungle, Jack.
Now that we've got some time to chat, you can fill me in on a few details.
Krieger was a top researcher at the Defense Department, specialized in genetics, protocols for human combat enhancement.
The Trigens.
Right.
She definitely has her priorities straight. It seems very appropriate to take a bath while you're fighting for your life on a random island with mutants on it and you have no contact with the outside world. Other than that, I guess her character is decent. Krieger is the typical evil German scientist. Of course they made him German just to dial up the evil factor to 11. Krieger is just a very basic character. There's even a plot point about him using his own DNA in the mutagen, supposedly making him the father of the Trigens. Doyle mentions this at the end of the game, saying that the Trigens are mad at Jack for killing their father. Then the game just completely drops this plot point and it is never mentioned again. I feel like they should have used this more in the story. Crow is the typical abusive commander. You see him at various points throughout the game where he's just yelling a bunch of orders to his scared men.
Do you suck dicks?
Mostly he's just saying a bunch of cliched militaristic lines. He's basically just the stereotypical angry mercenary leader. I would say that Doyle is probably the best character in terms of writing. There is very little background information provided about him. His motivation for betraying Jack and Valerie could have been a bit more fleshed out. Supposedly he does it only for money, which to me falls kind of flat. To be fair, wealth makes people do absurd and immoral things. It would have been a lot cooler if they perhaps mentioned some sort of internal struggle between the CIA and Doyle as a reason for him to betray them. I think that the game has a lot of inconsistent voice acting. Certain lines are delivered very well, some are basic, and some are horribly bad. Kinda like my voiceover work. Some good examples would be some of the Trigen lines.
I'm over here stroking my dick, I got lotion on my dick.
Some bad examples would be the stiff delivery in certain tense situations.
No, please. You don't understand. They sent me. They're always watching. You can't change this. You can't change the future.
That's definitely the cadence that I have when I have a gun pointed at my head. There is also some inconsistent plot points, such as the aforementioned Krieger being the Trigen father, but there's also other ones, and I confess a lot of these are very nitpicky. But when Jack meets Doyle in person for the first time, Jack doesn't recognize him, even though there's a live feed or at least a picture of Doyle displayed on the radio that Jack uses to communicate with him. They also verbally agreed to meet at the pier beforehand, yet he seems surprised when he shows up.
You should be approaching the pier shortly. As soon as you secure the area, I'll pick you up.
Right.
You must be Jack.
How did you know that?
I've been expecting you. They've moved the girl. Get in.
Another example would be when Jack and Valerie takes the antidote. If you look at the case where the antidote is stored, you see a biohazard symbol on the cover. Doyle even mentions the symbol. Why would an antidote have a biohazard symbol on it? You're telling me that Jack, who was in the US Army Special Forces, and Valerie, who's in the CIA, doesn't at least question the fact that it has a biohazard symbol on the case. But it seems weird to me that they don't even question Doyle's suggestion. When Jack is kicked out of the helicopter into the Trigen-infested area, somehow an M4 with 10 rounds in it lands next to him. Who threw him that rifle? Was it Valerie doing another helicopter excursion? Or was it Krieger or one of his men? Why would Krieger throw a gun to Jack? Doesn't he realize that that helps him? Isn't it Krieger's goal to kill Jack and Valerie? If his goal isn't to kill at least Jack, how come that he throws him into the Trigen-infested area? Clearly his goal is to kill him. It would have been better if they showed Valerie struggling against one of Krieger's guards and have that guard drop his rifle. That would have made more sense. Which leads me into my final point. What the hell is even Dr. Krieger's plan? He obviously knows about Jack and Valerie. They've been wreaking havoc on his islands, and he refers to Jack by name. He finally captures them. How come he just doesn't shoot them on the spot? Why bring them so close to his laboratory, which is his final holdout, by the way? Does he want Jack and Valerie to turn into Trigens and then use them in his Trigen army? He doesn't even know that they're infected when he finds them because they're not showing any symptoms yet. I don't understand what his motivation is. Clearly he knows that he's screwed. Whether or not he kills Jack and Valerie, surely the CIA would be investigating Krieger even more, knowing that they lost 2 operatives near his research zone. His actions doesn't make any sense, and the game never explains them either. This is the problem with the story. It doesn't flesh anything out. You know extremely little about what happens before, and you know even less about what happens after. You don't know anyone's motives or what their actual plans are. So the story falls flat and leaves a bunch of unanswered questions.
Stay low and avoid contact.
The gameplay is Far Cry's bread and butter. This is where the game really shines. The game is a first-person shooter mixing old-school design with elements of realism. You're moving pretty slowly and your character feels heavy. You really need to utilize cover and not run out into the open. To fully utilize cover, you need to use the leaning mechanic to take shots at enemies while hiding away as much of your body as possible. There is no running and gunning, there is no regenerating health or armor. All health and armor have to be restored using pickups. You have a stamina bar that is used for sprinting, jumping, and holding your breath while swimming. This is the only thing that recharges over time. The game emphasizes in taking your time with aiming in order to aim for enemies' weak spots. Enemies have multiple hitboxes that take a different amount of damage. You need to consider which gun you're using and which area that you're targeting. Armor is also a factor that plays into the hitboxes. For example, headshots against human enemies will usually kill them in either one shot or a short burst. However, certain human enemies might be wearing helmets. Now all of a sudden they can take way more damage if you hit their helmet. At that point it's better to aim for their face, unless it's covered by a visor or night vision goggles. Human enemies can also be wearing body armor, which means that if you shoot them in the chest or abdomen, you have to practically mag dump them in order to kill them. If they're not wearing any body armor, they'll die really quickly. The same principles are applied to Trigens. For example, the big Trojans that shoot rockets or are melee only usually have a glowing green circle on their chest. If you hit this circle, sparks will fly out of it and they'll take a lot of damage per shot. The player has 4 weapon slots available and they can put any weapon into any slot. You can only carry 1 copy of each gun. The weapons have a standard firing mode and some of them have an alternative firing mode. These fire modes can be switched between each other by pressing the X key by default. Some weapons have a zoom-in effect rather than iron sights, while other weapons use scopes. The weapons are the main cast in this game. Unlike the story characters, the game features a total of 11 weapons. These include the machete, which is a melee weapon that is pretty much completely useless. You're not going to be fighting enemies in that close quarters and you don't want to sacrifice a weapon slot in order to bring this along. It does high damage and can be used to break open ventilation shafts in order to save ammunition, but generally speaking it's completely worthless. The Falcon 357, based on the Desert Eagle, the magazine holds 9 rounds and it uses a unique ammunition type. This is a hard-hitting pistol, useful in the very early game. However, you're going to have access to way better weapons anyways, so this pistol becomes overshadowed very quickly. I found myself carrying this pistol for a short while, not really using it, and then immediately dumping it for a better weapon. The M4. This is the workhorse of this game. This weapon is encountered early on and will be used by a lot of enemies throughout the game, which means that the ammunition is always in steady supply. This gun will generate most of your kills and I advise you to pick this up and carry it with you until you find a better replacement. The AG-36, based on the G-36, this is basically an upgrade to the M4. They use the exact same ammunition type. Instead of having a switch between semi-automatic and fully automatic like the M4, the AG-36 has a underslung grenade launcher. The grenade launcher has 1 grenade in its tube, which requires a manual reload after every shot. The grenades do pretty high damage, but the arc of the grenades are very steep. The AG-36 also has a scope with a 2x zoom and a 4x zoom. The damage on the AG-36 is slightly lower than the M4 and the accuracy while hip firing and moving is worse. Personally, I usually skip the AG-36 because it feels inaccurate and slow. Instead, I keep the M4 for longer, considering its slightly higher damage and better accuracy while moving. The AG-36 is more accurate at longer ranges because of its scope, but it feels slower to maneuver with. The OICW, based on the XM29, is an upgrade to the AG-36. It uses the same ammunition type as the M4 and AG-36. The OICW has a upgraded grenade launcher holding 5 grenades in a magazine. The grenades go way further compared to the AG-36. Because of its higher capacity, you can fire more grenades a lot faster as well. The OICW has a scope with a fixed 3x zoom. The damage of the OICW is slightly higher than the M4 and the AG-36. It also has a magazine size of 40 instead of the other rifle's 30 rounds. I personally would recommend you to drop the M4 or AG-36 for this rifle. It's in every regard considered an upgrade. Unlike the AG-36, which feels inaccurate and clunky, the OICW does not feel the same way. The M4 is still probably more maneuverable than the AG-36 and the OICW, but considering all the other factors of the OICW, I'd still say that it is superior to the M4. The M249, based on the M249 SAW, is a belt-fed light machine gun. It uses the same ammunition type as the M4, AG-36 and OICW. It does not have a grenade launcher and no scope. It holds a 100 round belt, which is a way higher capacity than the other assault rifles. The M249 has a high rate of fire, but low automatic fire accuracy. It is best used in short bursts. This gun is encountered relatively late in the game. Personally, I never really used this gun. It lacks a scope and a grenade launcher, which decreases the gun's general utility. The damage and accuracy is decent, but considering its lack of other features, I don't consider this gun to be better than the OICW. The P90. This is one of the better close quarter weapons. It has a 50 round magazine and a very high rate of fire. The damage is a bit low, but the high rate of fire makes up for it. Since the fire rate is so high, you'll burn through a lot of ammunition, and unfortunately for this gun, there's usually not a steady supply. The P90 is light, which makes it maneuverable. It's accurate at short and medium ranges, but generates a lot of recoil. This gun is encountered early in the game, and I recommend to bring it along as a potential backup to your assault rifle of choice. The MP5 SD. This gun is very useful when sneaking. The gun has an integral suppressor, which makes the gun extremely quiet. When using this gun, you can pick off multiple guards without alerting anyone. They'll only be alerted if they see a corpse. The gun is accurate when fired in short bursts. Full auto fire is very inaccurate. The damage is very low, often requiring you to mag dump people in order to kill them. But if you go for headshots against unarmored opponents, it's quite effective. The gun has a 30 round magazine. The gun is encountered early in the game and uses the same ammunition type as the P90. I'd recommend to either pick this or the P90 as a backup to your assault rifle. The advantage of this gun is the fact that it is silent. However, that also makes the gun very situational. It is very useful for when assaulting bases of human enemies, but it is pretty bad when fighting against the Trojans. The Jackhammer, based on the Pancor Jackhammer. This is the only shotgun in the game. It is semi-automatic and holds 10 rounds in the magazine. It has a unique ammo type. The Jackhammer deals a lot of damage per shot if every pellet connects, which means that it is best used in close quarters. This is by far the best weapon at close ranges. The gun is encountered in early to mid game. The problem with the Jackhammer is that there is usually not a steady stream of ammunition for it, which means that you should only use it in situations that need it. This is a gun that you should carry with you at all times and use sparingly, primarily against enemies in close quarters that you have to deal a massive amount of damage to. The AW-50, the only sniper rifle in the game. This rifle is a bolt action rifle with 5 rounds in the magazine using a unique ammo type. The AW-50 deals a lot of damage per shot and is best used at very long ranges. This gun is encountered early in the game and should always be in the player's inventory. Ammunition is very scarce, which means that it should only be used in specific situations. Those situations is usually to take out high value targets such as other snipers or rocketeers posted in watchtowers. The rifle comes with a high powered scope that allows you to see very far. That means you can take out unsuspecting enemies before they even see you. While standing, the scope has a lot of sway, therefore you should try to fire this weapon either crouched or by going prone. And lastly, the rocket launcher, based on the M202 Flash. It holds 4 rockets in the magazine and is using a unique ammo type. The launcher is best used for destroying vehicles such as jeeps, boats and helicopters. It can also be useful for dealing splash damage against groups of tightly packed enemies or to take out high value targets. The rockets travel relatively slowly, which has to be accounted for at longer ranges. The launcher comes equipped with a scope, which makes it easy to place accurate shots, but the scope doesn't provide a lot of zoom. The scope of the launcher has way more sway than the scope of the AW-50. Crouching or proning helps a little bit, but not a lot, which means that it is going to be hard to hit accurately at longer ranges. The launcher appears very early in the game, but ammunition is scarce, Personally, I don't bring the launcher generally. I only use it during moments when it is highly incentivized, such as destroying the mortar boat during the 4th mission. Other than that, you could ditch the rocket launcher. The game also features 2 stationary weapons, them being the minigun based on the Vulcan minigun. This has a high rate of fire and decent damage per shot. It is very accurate if you fire in bursts and becomes more inaccurate if you fire full auto. With the high rate of fire, you're going to kill enemies very quickly. Because it is a stationary weapon, it is only going to be useful at certain parts of the game. The mortar, based on the Mark 19 mortar. This has a very slow rate of fire, but deals a lot of damage per shot. This appears way less than the minigun, and just like the minigun, it is only useful at certain parts of the game. In the game, the player has access to 4 different throwables. These can be used by pressing the G key by default, and you cycle through each throwable using the H key by default. The throwables available are the rock, which can be used an infinite amount of times. The rock is used to distract enemies by throwing it in an area and having them investigate it. Generally speaking, I don't really use the rock. It is very situational, but I'd imagine that you could probably use it to great effect while sneaking around with the MP5, where you distract and pick off unsuspecting guards. Other than that, it is not very useful. The hand grenade, based on the Mark II pineapple grenade. The player can carry 6 of these. Hand grenades are useful in close quarter areas where a lot of enemies are tightly packed together, such as different choke points. The grenade does a lot of damage, and if it lands under an enemy's feet, it is almost guaranteed to kill them. It is relatively situational. It really depends on the map. One good thing about the grenade is that you can bounce it off of walls and effectively kill enemies around corners. The smoke grenade. The player can carry 6 of them. Smoke grenades are used to create a smoke screen that allows the player to hide behind it. You could also use this to slip by enemies out in the open, to move to other parts of the map and create new angles to fire from. Generally speaking, the smoke grenades are highly situational. A lot of maps are really big and open, which renders the smoke grenade almost completely useless. The only situations where the smoke grenade is useful would be tight environments or as a last resort to get out of enemy gunfire. The flashbang. The player can carry 6 of these. The flashbang emits a bright light and a loud noise used to stun enemies. It works on humans as well as Trigens. The enemies become disoriented and will act irrationally, which makes them easy targets to eliminate. Generally, the flashbang, just like the smoke grenade, are highly situational. They're effective in tight environments, but in larger ones, not so much. They can also be used as a last resort to get out of harm's way. There's a few vehicles that the player can use, them being the hang glider, simply used as a means of transportation from a high elevation. While using the hang glider, you can use your normally equipped weapons. The buggy, which features a machine gun that can be fired by the player while driving. The 4-wheel drive vehicle, which features a machine gun but also a rocket launcher that can be used by the player while driving. The truck can only be driven, no guns can be used, and it has no armaments. The inflatable boat, which the player can use their normally equipped weapons while driving. The patrol boat, which features a machine gun and a rocket launcher that the player can use while driving. The forklift, which the player can use their normally equipped weapons while driving. Other than that, there are vehicles that only NPCs can use, such as the helicopter gunship, which features a soldier armed with a stationary minigun that can fire out of the helicopter's side. The cargo shopper, which comes and drops off troops in specific areas. And lastly, the cruiser boat, which is used as a mortar firing boat on the fort mission. It is also a boat used by Doyle to pick up Jack during the boat mission. The player has access to different types of equipment them being the flashlight. This is used to illuminate dark areas. It works rather well. The only downsides are that it has a very short range and it makes it easier for enemies to spot you. The binoculars used to survey areas from a distance and mark enemies so that they show up on the minimap. Very useful before starting engagements and also to spot enemies through foliage. The Cry Vision goggles used to illuminate very dark areas. It also shows enemies' heat signatures, which is very useful against the invisible enemies, spotting enemies through foliage and spotting enemies in very dark environments. The downsides to the Cry Vision goggles is that they run on a battery that eventually drains but charges back up by waiting. This can screw you over if you run out of power during crucial moments. If you're fighting enemies using the Cry Vision goggles, you can pick up their goggles to immediately recharge your own battery. The AI in this game is a mixed bag. For the most part it works fine, but then there are instances where it's pretty bad. The human enemies will often do what you expect, such as investigating noises made by the player, like gunfire or rock throwing. They'll try to hunt you down if they're suspicious or have spotted you. They're fairly accurate with their gunfire, meaning that they can kill you pretty quickly if you're in their sight line. But then there's also moments when they miss a lot of shots. Sometimes they'll call in extra reinforcements if you're spotted. While they're hunting down the player, they'll often take the most direct path and not really utilize the flanks. The way that they use cover is also pretty inconsistent. Sometimes they hide away well, and other times they just run out into the open, making them easy targets. Sometimes they even get stuck completely out in the open. Sometimes they push you aggressively, and other times they're passive, either sneaking towards you or staying put, waiting for you to push them. Their behavior is kinda all over the place. The Trigen enemies are very rudimentary. Most of the Trigens that you encounter are melee only, meaning that they're just going to run towards the player in a straight line, trying to swipe at you. They can do this lunge where they jump a far distance while swiping the player. They do a lot of damage per hit, often being able to kill the player in 1 or 2 swipes. But considering the fact that they're melee only and you often have a lot of distance between yourself and them, they're actually pretty easy to deal with for the most part. Then you have the Fat Boy Trigens armed with a rocket launcher. These are also easy to deal with in open spaces. In tight spaces they're way more dangerous. The rockets they fire travel extremely slowly, making them very easy to dodge just using your movement. You can also use certain angles to make them shoot rockets at you, but because their rocket launcher is on their right arm, you can often make them shoot a wall in front of them. That way they deal splash damage to themselves. The only annoyance with them is their high health, but this is where the jackhammer becomes useful. Just mag dump them with the jackhammer, aiming for the green circle on their chest, and then you switch to an AR and you'll easily finish them off. There's also 2 types of Trigens armed with firearms. You have the invisible Trigens and the leaping Trigens. The invisible Trigens you can see with the naked eye. They have a ripple effect around their character model, but it is best to use the Cry Vision goggles to see their heat signature. They don't take a lot of damage and they're usually armed with the low damaging MP5. They mostly just run around on the ground, making them pretty easy targets. Then you have the leaping Trigens that will jump very fast and very high to different vantage points. They can be pretty annoying to target while they're leaping that fast, which makes them very hard to hit. Just wait until they're standing still and try to take them out then. The most annoying thing about them is that they're very accurate with their shots, meaning that they can often snipe you across great distances. The game uses a checkpoint system, which means that there are no manual saves. For the most part this works pretty well, but then there are instances where the checkpoints are badly placed. Sometimes you could potentially reach a checkpoint while battling enemies, which means that if you reload the save, you'll be immediately put into combat. You could potentially get stuck in an infinite death loop. At this point you have to reload a previous checkpoint and replay the previous section. There's also certain missions where the checkpoints are very far apart. That makes it very annoying, because if you die in between two checkpoints, you'll lose a lot of progress. In the game there are 5 different difficulty levels. They are the following: easy, medium, challenging, veteran, and realistic. The descriptions make them sound very dramatic, but in reality it only changes the AI behavior, making them less aggressive and less likely to take cover. It changes the enemy's accuracy. It also changes how much health they have and how much damage that they deal to the player. The enemies don't spot the player as easily. The number of enemies are the same, and all the pickups on the map are also the same. There's also a checkbox to enable AI auto balance. This means that the game balances the difficulty based on how many times the player has died. I don't know how this works in practice, since I have never played with this on. If unselected, the difficulty stays constant throughout the game. The game itself is difficult. You're often vastly outnumbered, and the enemies deal a lot of damage per shot, even on the lower difficulties. In order to become proficient at the game, you have to figure out how many enemies you're fighting, what type of enemies that you're fighting, and learn some of the enemy spawns. This will come naturally through trial and error. You also have to figure out the map layout and which sections that follow each other, so that you can prepare the right equipment for the right section. Since I have played this game many times and know a lot of the pickups, enemy spawns, and which sections that I need specific equipment for, I always play this game on the realistic difficulty. I would not recommend new players to play on higher difficulties. Beat the game on easy or medium first, so that you learn the game and then later increase it. Generally speaking, the game starts off as relatively easy and becomes much tougher in the late game. A lot of the late game missions will make the early game missions seem like a cakewalk in comparison. I also want to make a complaint about the realistic difficulty setting. Every single section in the game is passable naturally, but there is a certain section on the 17th mission called Swamp. This mission has a notorious on-rails turret section, where Valerie is driving the player around while you're manning the turret. This section on realistic difficulty is not impossible, but extremely difficult or even luck-based. I've read about people passing this section legitimately, but I've never managed to do so myself. The 2 reliable options that you have is to either use an engine exploit or to cheat and use Godmode. The first half of the section is relatively easy to get through, but eventually you drive through a small military camp. This is where you'll often die immediately. On the realistic difficulty, you can die from a single shot if you're hit in the head, which is very likely to happen since you're trapped out in the open while inside the turret. The turret doesn't protect you at all, so you're just a sitting duck. The exploit that people use is that they look away from the enemy spawns. The CryEngine only renders things that are in the player's viewpoint, so if the player doesn't look towards the enemies, they won't spawn. The other option that you have is to enable DevMode and then enable Godmode. In order to enable DevMode, you have to right click on the Far Cry shortcut and click Properties. In the target line, you have to add -DevMode. In order to enable Godmode, you have to find the DevMode.lua file from the install directory and open it in a text editor. I'm using Sublime Text, but you could probably open it in Notepad as well. You need to scroll to the bottom of the file. Under the end of the function all weapons, you need to enter the following. I will paste this into the description of this video in case you want to copy it. After you've added those lines, save the document and launch the game. While in a mission and you press backspace on your keyboard, you should see a green text in the top left corner saying God 0. That means that it's working. In order to disable God mode, you just press backspace again and the text should disappear. Just for reference, I played through this section with God mode enabled and I got God 14, which means that I normally took so much damage that I would have died 14 times. This section is very janky and complete bullshit in terms of balancing. I feel like the developers probably didn't even play test this section while they were creating this difficulty.
You can plant the explosives in the transmission room underneath, and that will bring the whole thing down.
Graphically at the time, Far Cry was known as one of the best looking games on the market, which is 100% true. The game looked very good. Some of the maps are very large, especially some of the outdoor maps. The maps feature a open-ended level design, granting the player multiple ways to approach each situation. Sometimes you have to get from point A to B, and the map allows you to take different paths, encountering different problems for each path. There's also multiple ways of dealing with each situation. You can go in guns blazing, you could try to rush through the enemies, or you could sneak around them, ignoring them entirely. Generally speaking, the stealth in this game doesn't work very well, so it's really difficult to actually sneak around enemies, but it is also possible to completely ignore certain sections of enemies. There is a level of interactivity with the environment where the player can use objects against enemies. Two examples of that would be rolling barrels down slopes that hit enemies, or shooting a chain suspending a shipping container above a group of enemies, making the container fall. In terms of lighting, the game mixes it up a lot to great effect. It has a good mixture of dark and bright environments. There will be missions set outside during nighttime, providing the player with very little natural light. Then you will have missions set outside during daytime with a bright shining sun illuminating the map completely. You'll also have missions set outside during noon, combining a effect of both. A lot of the indoor missions also vary between brightly lit environments, pitch black environments, and everything in between. The game also has dynamic lighting, which they use to great effect to cast shadows of enemies against walls, or utilizing light sources to build suspense. Some of my favorite sections in terms of lighting are the following. The UI and the heads-up display are very sleek. The design is minimalistic and straight to the point. There is no useless clutter or unnecessary elements. They also convey a lot of information with very little occupied space. The game also utilizes some filter effects on the screen. The most used ones are the Cryvision goggles with its heat signature and the red damage indicator that flashes on the screen while taking damage. There is also a wide range of different environment types depicted in the game. You'll see anything from sunny beaches, rainforests, canyons, mines, swamps, volcanoes, simple beach huts, army camps, industrial complexes, an underground temple, high-tech research labs, and Japanese World War II era forts and bunkers. The game also has good bullet wound decals for its character models. The decals will be placed exactly where an enemy is hit, and the size of the decal will respond to the size of the caliber being used. There's also good blood effects for enemies getting shot. Blood will splatter on the walls if enemies are close enough. Most of the time it will splatter on the floor. When enemies die, a blood pool will start to form at their place of death. When firing weapons, you'll both hear and see bullet shells dropping on the floor as 3D objects. The textures in this game are also really good. I never saw a texture that looked bad or out of place. In terms of texture, just like the environments, there is a wide range of textures being used. The 3D models being used are also very high definition. Of course, by modern standards, there are way fewer polygons, but for its time, the models were detailed and smooth. The water effects look really good and the water is stunning. Even by today's standards, I think that the water looks great. For whatever reason, it seems like early 3D engines really nailed the water effects. Far Cry and Half-Life 2's water still looks good even today. The soundtrack clocks in at roughly an hour and a half. The music is composed with a wide range of instruments, anything from strings, horns, synths, choirs, and a lot of different percussive elements. There are sections of epic and bombastic classical music, creepy and eerie moments of suspense, and high-paced, pulsating electronic beats. A lot of the percussive sections give off a militaristic vibe, primarily some of the snare drums being used. There is also tribalistic elements in some songs, both in the percussion but also in its use of some folk instruments, primarily the wind instruments. The electronic parts of the soundtrack are reminiscent of the early 2000s rave music. The music will adapt to the gameplay. If the player is just progressing from area to area, the music will remain calm and suspenseful. If the player is spotted and enters combat, the music will ramp up and become more hectic. When you've killed all the enemies and return to a neutral state, the music will wind back down and become calm again. Each map has different music in it, a different ambience and different combat music in order to change things up. Some good sections to illustrate the music would be the following. terms of the sound effects, they're equally as good. The weapons that you use have a very punchy sound effect while firing. The reload and handling sounds are also appropriate for each gun. Nothing seems out of place. The human enemies have distinct and audible footsteps, which means that you can easily hear where they are. A lot of the dialogue outside of combat is usually good. Some of their voice lines during combat are pretty dumb, but they are still well recorded. The yells and screams that they let out as a result of being shot or dying are also good. The Trigen enemies sound like animals, very similar to lions. Most of them primarily growl, which makes it easy to hear where they are. Some of the human-made Trigens growl as well, but they also have some voice lines in English. Because of this, it relays a lot of information to the player just by listening. You can tell what type of Trigen you're about to face by identifying the sounds that the individual Trigens make. The same thing works for the human enemies. For example, certain groups of enemies are wearing hazmat suits, so their voice sounds very different in comparison to others, and you can easily notice which type of enemy you're about to encounter. The game also features great ambient sounds, anything from different types of birds, crickets, different types of wind, dripping water, computer monitors, water hitting the beach, croaking frogs, and radio static. These sounds vary depending on your environment, but they do a great job of filling out the silence in between the music. I think that overall, the audio in this game is fantastic. It does exactly what it needs to do. Some of the ambient sounds and music are really good, and when the music kicks in during either combat or specific story sections, it is equally as good. Whoever composed the music and those who worked on the audio of this game did a great job. The game has a couple of bugs and glitches. One example of a bug was during the 15th mission, Catacombs. There is a certain section where hazmat-wearing mercenaries are rappelling down a hole in the roof. Inside this room, there are also a number of Trigens. The mercenaries and the Trigens are supposed to fight one another, and then the player is meant to finish off any survivors. For whatever reason, the mercenaries wouldn't stop spawning. They just kept infinitely spawning, and new mercenaries appeared all the time. Eventually the game glitches out, probably because of the number of character models that are active, and the characters stop going into ragdoll mode when dying. Instead, they're just stuck in place. They're dead, but their animations are still playing. This footage illustrates the point. This bug also occurred during the 11th mission, Rebellion. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to capture any footage of that, but it happened right before reaching the archives. In the section where the Trojans and mercenaries are fighting one another near the watchtower. I don't know exactly what causes this bug. Maybe it is because the Trojan and mercenaries are fighting one another, or perhaps it is because I had the corpse stay setting as high as it could be set. The corpse stay setting defines how many seconds a corpse will remain on the map. You can enter a total of 3 digits, and I set it to 999. Maybe on certain missions where there's a lot of enemies, the engine isn't able to handle that many corpses, so instead the characters get locked into their animations instead of going into ragdoll mode. Another bug that happened was on the 12th mission, Archive. There is a certain outdoor section where elite mercenaries are fighting against fat boy Trojans. In this section you also see the mercenary leader Crow. Crow is supposed to run into a helicopter and leave the area. Crow managed to get into the helicopter, but for some reason the helicopter got stuck. The following footage shows this. Crow is immortal, and you cannot blow up the helicopter either. Crow is also manning the minigun on the chopper, which means that he can easily kill me. In order to progress to the next checkpoint, I have to reach the big door behind the helicopter, which is practically impossible on the realistic difficulty while Crow is firing at me. So your only option is to reload the previous checkpoint and redo that section, which I did, and after that it was fine. Crow managed to get into the helicopter and fly away, and I could progress with the mission. Another annoying glitch that I encountered is with the aim down sights. I usually play with ADS toggle, but with this game you're forced to play with ADS hold. The ADS is by default bound to the right mouse button. Sometimes when I would try to ADS, the ADS would flicker back and forth. It would zoom me in and then immediately zoom me out. It seemed very inconsistent. This is not a problem with my mouse. My mouse works perfectly fine on any other game. It often seemed to happen in combination with some other animation, such as sprinting, jumping, or swapping weapons. It worked well for the most part, but there were some instances where I got killed or took a lot of unnecessary damage because I couldn't ADS properly. Other bugs that I've read about online is that for some people they can't launch or play the game with the lighting setting set to very high. They had to lower it to just high instead. I never had a problem with this, and I was able to both launch and play the game with the setting set to very high. I've also read that the Steam version isn't patched to the latest update. One problem of the old version of this game was that enemies could shoot the player through walls, which is obviously not supposed to happen. I don't know whether that's true or not, since I don't own the game on Steam. I've bought the Good Old Games version, which is the version that I would recommend for anyone to use. A lot of the Good Old Game versions of older games are DRM free and updated to the latest patches. They're also optimized for newer systems, unlike a lot of versions that are on Steam. According to howlongtobeat.com, the game takes anything from 13 to 19 and a half hours to beat. I'd say that that is pretty reasonable for a first time playthrough on a lower difficulty. I managed to beat the game in 10 hours on realistic while I was recording footage, which means that you could beat the game in under 10 hours on lower difficulties if you're rushing through it. The price for this game varies depending on where you buy it. On Good Old Games, as of today, the game game costs $9.99 at full price. The game is often on sale for a highly reduced price, so I would recommend to wait until then. It seems stupid to pay almost $10 for a 20-year-old game. The same goes for the Steam version. On Steam it's listed at $9.99 as well. I believe that this game is on sale whenever they have a sale on the Far Cry franchise or when Ubisoft has a publisher sale. To summarize some of the aspects of the game, I would say that one positive aspect is the solid gameplay. The gameplay of Far Cry is very good. It has good and responsive gunplay, interesting enemies that are revealed one by one at a steady pace, interesting sections that require the player to use different strategies to get through each section, and the game highly incentivizes the player to use all the tools at their disposal. A negative aspect of the game is the bland story. The concept of the story is good, but it doesn't provide anything satisfying. The characters are stereotypes and they lack depth, and there is some very inconsistent voice acting. Another positive aspect of the game is the graphics. The game features a lot of different types of environments, fully utilizing the CryEngine's power. The 3D models are smooth and detailed, and the textures are good as well. A second negative aspect is the bugs and glitches. You'll have certain bugs that are game breaking, such as characters getting stuck or infinite enemy spawns, which requires you to reload a checkpoint and hope that it solves itself. Certain enemies will get stuck in animations instead of ragdolling. For me personally, the ADS problems, and for other people, the problem of failing to launch the game because of the lighting setting. A third positive aspect of the game is the great audio. The game has good dynamic music that reacts to the player's actions and good sound effects for pretty much everything. A third negative aspect of the game is some of the annoying mission sections. Objectively speaking, the well-known turret section on the swamp level, especially on the realistic difficulty setting, is just straight up bad. I'd imagine that most people would agree with that statement. Now the final aspects that I'm about to mention I'd say comes down to personal preference, so I'll put them in a neutral category. They are the following. The inherent difficulty of the game. This game is difficult even on the easy difficulty, which obviously is great if you like difficult games where trial and error is common, but if you don't like difficult games, then this game is going to be problematic. This game is not a fast-paced run-and-gun shooter, but it is neither a milsim. It tiptoes the line in between both of them, placing it somewhere in the middle with elements of both styles. The AI problems. For the absolute most part, the AI works fine. They do exactly what you expect them to do, and they do it well. But then there are certain instances where they either run out into the open or get stuck on things. But I would say that at least in 90% of scenarios, they're going to perform well. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not a massive problem. The checkpoint system. Same thing here, it simply boils down into personal preference. There is one bad checkpoint placement on the swamp level, right before you cross a bridge into a military camp. And on the boat level, a lot of the checkpoints are very far apart. Other than that, the game probably has well over 100 checkpoints in total across 20 different missions. Most of them are good and a minority of them are bad. I also think that you can enable manual saving and loading using the dev mode or perhaps the console, but I'm not sure. I've never tried it. The different game versions. This is not something that you can pin on the game, but I'll mention it anyway. Having to buy specific versions of a game on specific platforms can definitely be frustrating. It doesn't bother me because I already use good old games, but for someone that wants to streamline their catalog and only use Steam, it becomes more problematic. As I mentioned before, I don't own the Steam version, so I don't know whether it's patched or not, but for me, there have been plenty of old games that I've bought on Steam that I've had problems with either launching or playing, such as Max Payne, Rome Total War, Hitman Codename 47, Dead Space, and Fallout 3. It sucks having to download community-made patches or to sit and edit game files to change certain values, or forcing your graphics card to only produce a certain amount of frames in order to not mess up the game's physics. It should simply be to install the game and then play it. Fortunately, Good Old Games patches older games, making them run better on modern systems, so that's why I for the millionth time recommend the Good Old Games version. As a closer for this video, I'm going to rate the game. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give this game a cow hoof, which means that it is good, but it has some flaws.